of all time. Let me just tell you, and it's none of the names that I mentioned. So my dad told me a story. He said, when my dad was police chief of New York City, he said, hey, I used to work with this guy. He was so tall. He says, and his son was a great basketball player. He said his father's name, him and his son had the same name. He was the senior, he was the junior. He said his father's name was Lou Alcindor Sr., and he said he had a really tall son, close to 7 feet tall, that played basketball in the Bronx. He said he was being scouted by all the great colleges, and eventually gets scouted by the great wizard of LA, by John Wooden, and he's brought to UCLA. And so Lou Alcindor Jr. goes to UCLA, gets drafted by the Milwaukee Bucks, and then gets traded to the Los Angeles Lakers, has a religious experience in Islam, and changes his name, you know it as Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. How many have ever heard of that name before? Let me tell you a story that I just read about Kareem Abdul-Jabbar that John Wooden wrote in one of his books. Talk about being remarks to send you down. It was at a time where literally UCLA was doing what no other university could ever do. I mean, their basketball program is considered so iconic. There is not another basketball program that could have done this. Some of you going like, you don't know LSU. Okay, let's just calm down for just a second. But we beat Mississippi State. Okay, we understand that, okay? And Ohio State law, I get it. But what they did was John Wooden and UCLA won 10 national championships in basketball in 12 years. It'll never be repeated again. 14 in total. It was one of the most amazing feats that had ever taken place, and the iconic players that he had. It was one of the greatest. He is the greatest basketball coach in college history. Well, anyway, while he's there, they're in the 60s, and they're killing everybody. Undefeated seasons, Lou Alcindor, 7'4" at this time, doing amazing. Well, here's what was happening. Nobody could stay with UCLA, and for the reason is nobody was tall enough to stay with Lou Alcindor. So the NCAA in the 1960s, doing probably one of the most tense times of a dark part of American history during the civil rights time, literally said, we don't like what that boy's doing, so they outlawed the slam dunk in college basketball. Can you imagine if they did that today? It would be riots everywhere. I mean, how can you have basketball and no one can slam dunk? So the NCAA pulled, and it really was, they pulled a racial move and said, we don't want that boy doing that anymore, and pulled it out. And Lou Alcindor literally went into a tailspin. He says, I'm done with this. I'm done with basketball. This is wrong. And it was wrong. And they just go, I'm done with all this. I'm quitting. I'm out of here. And John Wooden shows up at this dark moment, just like when God showed up for Elijah and God showed up for Moses. John Wooden shows up and speaks to Lou Alcindor. And let me read to you the words that he gives, these life words at this darkest moment that he was about to walk out on the UCLA Bruins and not be part of a historical moment. Here are his words. Wooden said to him, Lewis, this is going to make you a better player. You're going to have to work a little harder, develop, and this is what he tells him, you're going to have to develop a little hook shot that's a little short away from the boards that you can knock it right off the backboard and put it in the basket. There's no way this will do anything but make you a much better ball player. And at that moment, Lou Alcindor, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, developed a shot that they say to this day is the most indefensible shot in all of NBA basketball. And it's called, some of you know it, it's called the sky hook. When you're 7'6" and you're out here, it doesn't matter who's there. LeBron James couldn't do it. And that boy, in the worst times in civil rights, when he was about to quit, develops a shot in the midst of the worst of the situations that not only keeps him at UCLA, he becomes the #1 scorer in NBA history. Some of you are going like, what about LeBron James? Okay, let me just give you perspective. LeBron James is 7th. That's how amazing Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is. And it all came out of this darkest moment when he wanted to begin to quit. Here's what's amazing. If he quits, then there's no sky hook. If he quits, then there's no history that's made. If Moses quits, then he's not a deliverer. And I'm telling you, in the darkest moments that you go through, listen to me close, God's gonna find you a sky hook. God's gonna find you something that you couldn't have got any other place. And God has a way of bringing that out. Just when Moses thought, look at me, my life is messed up, God goes, hold on. that's not a skyhook, but you're about to be a deliverer and get 3 million people out of slavery. Because listen, here's what's awesome. Because man's remark may have drove you to the wilderness, but God says, you're not going alone, I'm going with you. And finally, and let's close with this, number 3, which is so important, man's words never have to have the final say in your life.